Today we have 4 interviewers that are going to go around to talk to 4 different philosophers to ask them the most itching questions.
Good morning, how are you today? What do you mean by good morning exactly? Do you mean to wish me a good morning? Or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good this morning? Or that it is a morning to be good on? All of those, I guess. Do you guess or do you know for certain? Look, Socrates, I'm just the interviewer doing my job. Can I ask you the questions? As you wish. So, first question. If you were to characterize a living thing as being human, what would be the necessary criteria for that? Well, thinking about your question, we first must ask ourselves what precisely is a living thing. Is it something that can move? Something that can breathe? Something that thinks? Something that has a soul? For the sake of this question, let's assume it is anything that is on Earth and that is an animal. What would separate us from, let's say, a cat or a dog, basically? I would assume the way we look is quite sufficient. We stand straight up. We're mostly hairless, but not slimy like reptiles. We use our hands unlike apes that use all fours. And we have distinct faces. What about the mind of a human? How does that differ from any other animal on the planet? We can solve complex problems, of course. My entire study is based around critical thinking. My fellow Athenians could be compared to other animals if it were not for my prying at their minds. When we think critically, we indulge in our humanity, and that is what characterizes us most as human. Interesting. I think you've answered that pretty thoroughly by the looks of it. Now, on to the next question. Now, you mentioned a lot of the physical and psychological properties that make us human, but looking within the psyche, what would characterize a human as a person? Or in more simple terms, what would you say makes up a personal identity of someone? It depends. What do we mean by personal? Does personal mean our own identities? If that were to be true, nobody would ever become a part of a society, because a society is made up of a mix of identities that people share and some take on as their own. Does personal mean private? If that is the case, then nobody would ever know about identities, because it would never be shown to others. Again, for the sake of the interview, let's just say personal identities mean the same thing as the uniqueness of someone. Well then, what makes someone unique would possibly be the fact that they seek knowledge beyond themselves. If my peers were to only think of survival, and nothing more except what is in front of them, they would not be unique but all the same. I tell you, being unique is searching for knowledge, and to think critically, as I teach so much about. So, the basis of all personhood is critical thinking? Yes, because without it, we would not have evolved beyond strictly survival instincts. Wouldn't that be wrong of you to assume that critically thinking is the only basis for evolving and for being a person? It possibly could be, but without critical thinking, I would not be able to figure that out either. Fair point. Now, on to the last question I have for you. The basis of this interview is not only to pry at your philosophy, but also to get a sense of your moral character. With that in mind, Socrates, what would you classify as a human person being moral? Morality is a tricky topic because of the amount of questions that follow it. What is good to someone may not be good to someone else in another part of the world. What I think to be moral does not concern me whatsoever, because it will always be wrong to someone. That is true, but couldn't you apply that thinking to everything we know? There's always one person that might think differently from everything else, such as from facts. That is true, and this is why always questioning yourself gets you further and further to absolute certainty, but we will never achieve it because of this limitation. So your answer to morality is simply everyone is wrong? What I am saying is that my answer does not matter, because what I think is right might be wrong. Well, that was not what I was expecting, but who am I kidding? You're Socrates. There always seems to be a half answer with all of your questioning. What can I say? My peers call me a gadfly for a reason. That's all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for coming down here and answering them. Anything to help another person become a better critical thinker.
Hello, Mr. Bentham. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm not doing bad. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking.
Are you doing well, or are you not doing bad? Is there currently any pain in your life, Or are you finding pleasure?
Well, if you were to word the question like that, I'd say I'm not doing too bad.
Oh, thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. So let's get right into things. You were very well known for your utilitarian ideas that involve the consequences of human actions. Could you maybe elaborate on some of your beliefs?
Of course, when looking at the actions of a human, they should always be done in order to bring about the best result to the most amount of people. I call this the principle of utility, and the principle is meant to assure that the best consequence is always a result, whether it be in practice, laws, or any type of general action.
While we were on the topic of humans, what do you think the necessary criteria is for one to be considered a human?
Well, for someone to be considered a human, they must be able to seek pain and pleasure. What I mean is us as humans are pleasure seekers and pain avoiders in every action that we do. Human nature is ruled by two masters, pain and pleasure. And for order someone to be considered human, they must be self-aware and seek pleasure and avoid pain.
Is there any way for us humans to avoid pain and seek pleasure in a more efficient way?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I myself developed my own way to avoid pain, and I call it the hedonistic calculus. To operate the calculus, one must decide what their options are in a given situation. Then one must look at the consequences of these actions in a list, whether they be positive or negative. Then these consequences are added up together, and whatever side has the highest positive total is the best option to choose.
When does one know when to use the hedonistic calculus? Should they use it in all situations?
The calculus can be used in many different situations, either big or small. It all depends on the person who's using the hedonistic calculus. I would recommend to use the calculus on decisions that have a big impact on a person's life, such as what school to attend for college.
Earlier in our conversation, you said that what it is to be a human is the ability to seek pleasure and avoid pain. I was wondering what your definition of being a person or what personhood is.
I would say that in order to be a person, you have to have your own thoughts and opinions. For example, my hedonistic calculus, some people would consider a positive a negative, or vice versa. A person is someone that has their own unique outlook on something. To summarize what I just said, I would say that what makes us individuals is the different views that we have.
Since you are so involved in utilitarianism and consequentialism, could you discuss any problems you have with the common ideas of both?
Yeah, of course. When looking at the two, there's obviously no way to be able to take into account all of the possible results or consequences of an action. For example, there are some instances where an action can produce a good result, but the person who started the action had an evil intent originally.
You made some great points in today's interview. However, I want to know how you plan to use your framework to actually show some production into our society.
When looking at my framework, there's always one common goal, and that is for the well-being of the people. When considering any action, the consequence is by far the most important factor. When you use the word framework, my work also really wasn't created as a utilitarian ethical framework, but rather as a guide to create social and legal reform. For example, in a society with the government making laws, or, as I said earlier, as someone making a decision to go to college.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Bentham. It was a pleasure.
Oh, of course, anytime.
Thank you for coming in today, Mr. Rogers. I would like to take a moment to commend you on your amazing job inspiring those around you. Thank you, but I would say people inspire me more than I inspire them. What do you mean by this? I do not do anything special. I am just a person like you are. Interesting. Well, hopping right into it, what would you classify the characteristics of an individual person then? A person is someone who spreads kindness, and what separates us from each other is the way we do such a thing. Take you, for example. Your way of spreading kindness was to take the time to interview someone like me. Each of us have a duty in the world, and we learn from one another how to properly conduct it. What would you classify the characteristics? I agree with what you said, but I'm here to ask the questions. Yes, you are. Continue on. If classifying an individual person on how they spread kindness, how would you go on to explain the criteria of a human? Like the criteria for a person, a human is someone who also spreads kindness. We come to touch the world unlike the way an animal can. A dog cannot do as much as you or I in spreading the kindness. Of course, in some ways they can, but the most effective and spreadable ways is that of which a human can do. So, would you agree that your philosophy is that of which follows a virtuous ethics? I guess you could say such a thing. I follow what is right. I am nothing special. I am no greater than you are. I would say you have a lot more fame than me, which would make you somewhat greater in an aspect. Why would you say such a thing? Well, in some way, people would assume someone is greater if famous. I would not classify me as someone who is famous. I am who I am. There are lessons to be learned through many things, and this is what I hope to teach people. So you would say that your goal is to teach people things? I do not have a set goal. I am here to spread kindness and teach the world how to do so. It is hard to go through life without a helping hand, and reaching mine out may help those. That is very nice. How are you today? I'm fine. Why the long face? I'm still asking the questions here. Mr. Rogers, would you say you are a hero in today's society? No, I would not say I am a hero. As I was saying before, I am just a person. I do not think of myself higher than anyone else. I am here for those who listen and watch. Why do you use puppets in your show? Sometimes the lessons to be learned are not written out for you. The show is targeted towards a younger audience, and having puppets in the show is a great way to bestow a lesson onto them, but also having them figure it out for themselves. Wow, I must say that's pretty impressive stuff. I truly enjoy what I do and hope that I at least brought a smile to someone's face. Well, I am sure that you did. Thank you for coming in today, and may I say, it sure is a wonderful day in the neighborhood.
Aristotle, is that you? Why, yes, my friend, it is me. The one that created the Nicomachean Ethics? Yes. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions, specifically about humans' rational essence, the teleological universe, and developing virtuous character? Absolutely. I feel very strongly about virtue ethics. Are humans essentially rational? Yes. Humans are born with a rational essence, or nature. Therefore, we think with reason and logic. What two kinds of reasoning is the rational part made up of? The rational part consists of intellectual reason and moral reason. But, as humans, we don't always think rationally. How does that work? Well, humans are also irrational. Why do we have to make irrational decisions? The soul has an irrational part consisting of the vegetative part and the desiring element. Animals contain this vegetative part, but only humankind contains the desiring element. It is extremely important that the rational part of the soul controls the desiring element, so that we make logical and moral choices. If one drives too fast, cheats on a test, or starts rumors, our happiness could be altered. If I control the irrational part of my soul, will I achieve happiness? Yes, the universe is teleological. Everything you know of is made that way to achieve a specific goal. In fact, telos literally means end, purpose, or goal. Can you give me an example of this? Sure, an acorn is a perfect example. Every acorn is made specifically so it can achieve its goal of being an acorn. Ultimately, its goal is to grow into an oak tree. In a similar way, our end goal is happiness. In order to achieve this, we must engage in our rational thinking and work at our very best. Could you explain your idea of the golden mean? Yes, While following the golden mean, one chooses between the two extremes of excess and deficiency and strives to be self-sufficient. Are the extremes the same for everyone? No. We all use rational thinking and reason to determine what is right for us, to find that balance. However, there is no extreme for doing things that are bad, like stealing. Do you agree with Plato's statement of knowledge is virtue and ignorance is vice? I do not agree with that statement. Just because we have knowledge of what is good and right does not mean we will act morally. We are not born virtuous. We have to practice and work at being trustworthy and reliable. We are not born good or bad by nature. The virtuous character must be worked at.